the incredible true story of the Enfield Poltergeist. If you've ever experienced something that defied explanation, a door that slammed shut on its own, footsteps in an empty hallway, or objects that seemed to move by themselves, you might have brushed it off as imagination or coincidence. But for one ordinary family in North London in 1977, these inexplicable events weren't just isolated incidents. They were the beginning of what would become one of the most documented and controversial paranormal cases in history. You see, what happened at 284 Green Street in Enfield would challenge not just the beliefs of everyone involved, but our very understanding of reality itself. And while skeptics have spent decades trying to explain it away, the events that unfolded in that modest council house would leave an indelible mark on paranormal research and everyone who witnessed them firsthand. But before we dive into this strange, dark, and mysterious tale, you need to understand something crucial. This isn't just a ghost story. This is a story about a family pushed to the breaking point, about the fine line between skepticism and belief, and about how sometimes the truth can be more unsettling than any fiction. It's August 30th, 1977, and single mother Peggy Hodgson is going through her usual evening routine in their modest home in Enfield, a working-class suburb north of London. Her 4 children, Margaret, 13, Janet, 11, 10, and Billy, 7, are getting ready for bed. There's nothing remarkable about this particular night, nothing to suggest that it would become the first chapter in a story that would captivate the world. But here's the thing. Just as Peggy is about to turn in for the night, she hears her children calling from upstairs. Now, this isn't unusual in itself. Kids often find excuses to stay up late. But there's something different about their voices this time. There's fear in their calls. When Peggy reaches the children's bedroom, Janet and Johnny are standing there, looking pale and frightened. They tell her they've heard strange noises and that their beds have been moving on their own. Peggy, being a practical woman, assumes they're just making excuses to stay up late. She tells them to settle down and go to sleep. But that's when it happens. A heavy chest of drawers suddenly slides across the floor, not just a few inches, but several feet. Peggy tries to push it back, but it's as if something is fighting against her. She can feel the resistance, like an invisible force pushing back. You might be thinking this could be explained away. Maybe the floor was uneven, or maybe the kids were playing a prank. But what happens next defies any rational explanation. A loud knocking sound begins echoing through the walls. Not just random knocks, but deliberate ones, as if someone or something is trying to communicate. Peggy checks the adjoining houses, thinking it might be the neighbors, but the sounds are clearly coming from within their own walls. That's when she does something that would change everything. She calls the police. Now imagine being one of the police officers who responded to that call. You're probably expecting to find kids playing pranks or maybe a domestic disturbance. Instead, you arrive to find a family huddled together in genuine fear, and while you're there, you witness something that your training never prepared you for. WPC Carolyn Heaps arrives at the scene and writes in her official report something that would later become crucial evidence in this case. She states that she witnessed a chair move across the floor on its own, not just a slight movement, but a definitive slide of several feet. She checks for strings, magnets, any possible explanation, but finds nothing. But here's where things get even more interesting. The activity seems to center around 11-year-old Janet. She's the one who appears to be the focus of whatever force has invaded their home. And over the next few days, the phenomena escalate in ways that no one could have predicted. Objects begin flying across rooms, toys appear in places they couldn't possibly have gotten to on their own. The knocking becomes more frequent and seems to respond to questions. 1 knock for yes, 2 for no. The family is terrified, but they're also trapped. This is their home, and they have nowhere else to go. Local media gets wind of the story, and soon reporters are camping outside their house. But what they capture on film and audio will become some of the most compelling evidence in the history of paranormal investigation. By September 1977, word of the Enfield case has reached the ears of the Society for Psychical Research, SPR. Two investigators, Maurice Grosse and Guy Liam Playfair, arrive at the house. What they think will be a quick investigation turns into a study that will consume the next 2 years of their lives. But let me tell you about Maurice Grosse for a moment, because his background is crucial to understanding what happens next. Grosse isn't some wide-eyed believer looking for ghosts. He's a successful inventor and businessman who became interested in paranormal research after the tragic death of his daughter Janet in a motorcycle accident. He approaches the case with skepticism and scientific rigor. When Grosse and Playfair begin their investigation, they set up voice recorders and cameras throughout the house. They interview neighbors, check the house's history, and look for any natural explanations for what's happening. But what they document over the next several months challenges everything they thought they knew about the paranormal. You see, the activity isn't just random anymore. It's becoming more focused and more intelligent. And that's when something happens that takes this case to an entirely new level. Janet begins speaking in a voice that isn't her own. But we're not talking about a child trying to sound like an adult. This is a deep, gravelly voice that sounds like it belongs to an elderly man. When recorded and analyzed, voice experts confirm that it would be physically impossible for a young girl to produce these sounds naturally. The voice identifies itself as Bill Wilkins, claiming to be a man who had died in the house years before. Now here's where it gets really interesting. When researchers later check the house's history, they discover that a man named Bill Wilkins had indeed died in the house years earlier, a fact that neither Janet nor any of the family could have known. The voice doesn't just speak, it argues with investigators, swears profusely, using language Janet wouldn't have known, and even answers questions about Bill Wilkins's life that turn out to be historically accurate. During these episodes, Janet appears to be in a trance-like state, and afterward, she has no memory of what was said. But the physical phenomena continue alongside these voice manifestations. Objects fly across rooms with such force that they leave dents in the walls. Janet is seen levitating by multiple witnesses, not just floating slightly, but being thrown across rooms as if picked up by an invisible force. These events are captured in photographs that experts have studied for decades without finding evidence of manipulation. One particularly disturbing incident occurs when a metal fireplace is wrenched from the wall and thrown across the room. This isn't a lightweight modern fixture. It's a heavy, cast-iron fireplace that would require considerable strength to move. Yet it happens while everyone is watching, with no visible means of manipulation. By early 1978, the case has attracted international attention. Skeptics and believers alike are drawn to the house, each trying to prove their own theories. But what happens next would divide the paranormal research community and raise questions that remain unanswered to this day. One night, during a particularly intense investigation session, something unexpected occurs. Janet is caught on camera bending spoons and attempting to manipulate objects when she thinks no one is watching. When confronted, she admits to faking some of the phenomena. Now, you might think this destroys the credibility of the entire case. But here's where things get complicated. Janet later explains that she only faked these incidents because the investigators and media were constantly demanding phenomena, and she felt pressured to perform. She says she faked maybe 2% of the incidents, but what about the other 98%? Maurice Grosse and Guy Liam Playfair continue to stand by their investigation, pointing out that many of the most significant phenomena were witnessed by multiple people simultaneously and captured on camera under controlled conditions. They argue that the fact Janet occasionally tried to fake phenomena doesn't explain away the overwhelming evidence they've gathered. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of the case comes from an unexpected source. John Burcombe, a senior camera operator for the BBC, visits the house to film a documentary. He's openly skeptical and determined to expose any trickery. What he captures on film leaves him questioning everything he believes about the natural world. During filming, a Lego brick flies across the room, hitting him in the head. The trajectory is impossible. It comes from a corner where no one is standing, and the force with which it hits him is far greater than what a child could generate. More importantly, all of this is captured on his professional camera equipment. The activity in the house continues to escalate, becoming more violent and unpredictable. Janet is frequently found with unexplainable injuries, bruises and scratches that appear while others are watching. During one particularly frightening incident, she's found unconscious in a small space behind her bed, contorted in a position that medical experts later say would have been impossible to maintain consciously. The poltergeist activity gradually begins to subside in 1979, though it never completely stops. The Hodgson family continues to live in the house until 1979 when they finally move away. Janet grows up to lead a relatively normal life, though she rarely speaks about her experiences publicly. But here's the thing that makes the Enfield Poltergeist case so compelling. Unlike many paranormal cases that fade into obscurity, this one left behind a mountain of evidence. There are photographs, video recordings, audio tapes, police reports, and testimonies from hundreds of witnesses, including skeptical journalists, police officers, and researchers. The case has been studied, debated, and analyzed for decades. Some claim it was an elaborate hoax, pointing to Janet's admitted fakery. Others argue that the sheer volume of independently witnessed phenomena, combined with the physical evidence, suggests something genuinely paranormal was at work. But perhaps the most thought-provoking aspect of the case isn't about whether it was real or fake. It's about how it changed the lives of everyone involved. Maurice Gross, who began as a skeptic, devoted the rest of his life to paranormal research. The police officers who witnessed events firsthand had to reconcile what they saw with their training and worldview. And Janet Hodgson, now grown with children of her own, still maintains that while she may have faked some incidents under pressure, the vast majority of what happened in that house was real. Today, 284 Green Street still stands. It's occupied by new residents who report no paranormal activity. But the questions raised by what happened there between 1977 and 1979 continue to challenge our understanding of reality. You see, whether you believe in the paranormal or not, the Enfield Poltergeist case forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the line between what we can explain and what we can't is thinner than we'd like to admit. And maybe, just maybe, there are things happening in our world that we're not yet equipped to understand. As Janet Hodgson herself said in a rare interview years later, "I know what happened. I was there. But I don't expect anyone to believe it unless they were there too." And perhaps that's where we should leave it. Not as a definitively solved mystery, but as a reminder that sometimes the strangest, darkest, and most mysterious stories are the ones that resist easy explanation. They're the ones that make us question what we think we know about the world around us, and more importantly, what we don't know. The Enfield Poltergeist case remains one of the most thoroughly documented paranormal investigations in history. But like all the best mysteries, it leaves us with more questions than answers. And maybe that's exactly how it should be.